There's a cottonwood standing dead at the bend of the Pinaleno Wash, split open down one side like something tried to climb out of it from the inside. Folks around here ride past it without looking anymore. I can't. I'm the one who found what was breathing inside it. I've kept a ledger every day of my working life. Weather, calving, fence line, the price of nails. 41 years of small handwriting in cheap books. And there is exactly one page I tore out and burned, because I was ashamed of what I'd first written there before I knew the truth. This is the story I should have written instead. About a man my whole town had already decided was a criminal. About the hollow tree that kept him alive when we'd left him to die. And about the morning he stood in the middle of our street, half frozen and barely able to speak, and said the one thing that none of us, not the marshal, not the preacher, not me, could answer. I'm an old man telling it slow because slow is the only honest way left. Stay with me. By the end you'll understand why nobody in that town ever talked about it again, and why I've never stopped. The storm came down off the Galliuros the way bad news always comes, early, and worse than anybody guessed. I was out past dark trying to get my heifers down from the high pasture before the snow shut the trail, and I was cursing every one of them by name, because a man alone with cold cattle either talks or he goes mad, and I'd never been much for going mad. I had my collar up and my hat tied down with a wool sock my late wife had darned so many times it was more darn than sock. That's the kind of thing you notice when your face is freezing. Small, useless tenderness. Edna's stitches. 11 years gone, and still keeping the wind off my ears. I didn't hear the sound at first. The wind was doing its work, hauling grit and ice sideways across the wash. But when the gust dropped just for a breath, I heard it again, and my horse heard it too, because his ears swung forward and he locked up under me hard enough that I near went over his neck. It came from the big cottonwood at the bend. Now I want to tell you I'm a brave man, but the truth is the first thing I thought of was ghosts, because that tree had been dead 3 years and dead things don't make noise. The second thing I thought of was a wounded animal, a cat maybe, caught in the split of the trunk. I almost rode on. God help me, I almost rode on and let the snow have it. But I have this habit. I count things, always have. Fence posts, stars, the chews it takes to get through a piece of jerky. And as I sat there my fool brain started counting the sound, and it was even, in, out, too even for a dying animal. It was a man breathing, slow, labored, the way a man breathes when each one might be the last he can afford. I got down. My boots punched through the crust to my shins. I led my horse closer and I called out, and nothing answered but that breathing, ragged now, like I'd scared it. The cottonwood had hollowed out the way old cottonwoods do, rotted from the heartwood until the trunk was a standing shell, and the lightning that killed it 3 summers back had split a seam down the south side, just wide enough that a small man might fold himself into it. I struck a match against my belt buckle. The wind killed it. I struck another with my body curled around it like I was praying, and in that one yellow second I saw a face. A man's face, dark with cold, lips gone the color of a bruise, eyes open and looking right at me with the kind of flat, far-off stare you see on creatures that have given up on being rescued and are only waiting now to be left alone to finish. Apache. I knew it the second I saw him, and I am not proud of what went through me. The whole territory had been ugly that year, raids down south, 2 cowhands killed over by Aravaipa, every white man within 100 miles sleeping with a rifle and a grudge. And here I'd been told, like everyone in Redemption had been told, that there was a bad one loose, a thief, a killer, cast out by his own people and run off from ours. A man with no place left to be, which in my experience is the most dangerous kind of man there is. I had heard his name spoken in the saloon like a thing you spit. Tsela, the one the Indian agent's men had been hunting since the fall, the one who'd robbed the agency stores and put a knife in a soldier, they said, the one even the other Apache wouldn't shelter, they said, because he'd broken some law of theirs too. And here he was, dying in a tree on my land. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to get back on my horse. I'm going to tell you the truth because I'm too old to dress it up. I stood there in the snow doing the arithmetic of my own life. I had a rifle. He was unarmed and could barely lift his head. Nobody would have said a word against me if I'd ridden to town in the morning and reported a frozen Indian found dead in a hollow tree. Some men would have shaken my hand. What stopped me was his hand. He'd lifted it just barely, just an inch off his chest, not reaching for a weapon, not reaching for me, just opening, palm up, empty. The oldest sign there is. It costs a man everything to make that sign to an enemy. It is the surrender of every last thing you have left, which when you've got nothing is somehow the most you can give. And I thought of Edna. I thought of how she'd have already had him out of that tree and yelled at me for standing there. She used to say a body could measure a man by what he did when no one was watching, and he had every excuse to do wrong. I'd buried her with a clear conscience on that score mostly. I wasn't going to dirty it now. "All right," I said to him, to her, to nobody. All right, don't you fight me." He didn't have it in him to fight me. That was the mercy of it. I got my arms in through the split and he weighed nothing, like the cold had already taken half of him. And when I pulled him out into the wind he made a sound, not a word, just a sound that I have heard maybe twice since in my whole life, both times from animals in traps. It was the sound of a body that has braced so long against pain that being moved feels like dying. I got him over my saddle. I walked the horse the whole 2 miles back to the house because I didn't trust the trail and I didn't trust him not to slide off. And I held his wrist the entire way to feel that pulse going, soft as a moth against a window, and every time it faltered I'd say something stupid out loud. Not yet, you stubborn thing," like my voice was a rope I could throw him. The kitchen was the only warm room. I kept the fire there banked at night because an old man living alone learns to be his own wife about some things. I laid him down on the floor by the stove on Edna's good quilt, which I want you to understand I had not let another living soul touch in 11 years, and I cut his clothes off him with my skinning knife because the cold had welded them to him. That's when I saw he'd been shot. Old wound, weeks old, gone bad, a furrow along his ribs that had scabbed and torn and scabbed again. The skin around it the angry red-black that means a body is losing a quiet war. And under that, the older story written all over him. Scars. Lash marks across his back healed pale. A foot that had been broken and set crooked. The body of a man who had been hurt deliberately, repeatedly, by people who meant it. I am not a tender man. I've gutted more cattle than I can count and helped bury my own children, 2 of them, before they were 3. But I sat back on my heels next to that ruined body on my wife's quilt, and I felt something turn over in me that I didn't have a name for, because that was not the body of a killer who had it coming. That was the body of someone who had been on the losing end of every fight he'd ever been in, and was still, even now, breathing in that slow, stubborn count, refusing to lose the last one. I did what Edna would have done. I warmed water, not hot. You don't warm a frozen man fast. Even I knew that, and I worked it into him with cloths, and I dripped sugar water between his lips off the end of a spoon, drop by drop, half the night, until the gray went out of his face and a little color came back, and somewhere near dawn his eyes opened and found mine and held there. He looked at the room, the rifle on the wall, the door. He was figuring it the same way I had out by the tree, the arithmetic of survival, and I watched him decide I was a danger and brace himself to do something about it, and fail because his body wouldn't answer. "Easy," I said. "I'm not easy. You're on my place, found you in the tree." I pointed vaguely at the window, the storm, the world. "Nobody knows, just me." I don't know how much English he had. Plenty, it turned out. More than half the white men I knew, but right then he just watched me, and I watched him. 2 animals in a warm room, each deciding whether the other was going to kill them. Then he said the first words I ever heard him say. His voice was wrecked, barely a scrape of sound. "Why," he said, not a question the way I'd have asked it, a demand, Why pull me out? Why warm me? Why not let it end the easy way for both of us? And I'll be honest, I didn't have an answer that would have held up in the saloon. I didn't say because it's Christian because I wasn't sure it was. And I didn't say because you're innocent because I had no earthly reason to think you were. And I didn't say because my wife would have, though that was nearest the truth. What I said was, because you made the empty hand sign, and a man only does that when he's already given up everything else, seemed wrong to take what was left. He looked at me for a long time. The fire popped. Out the window the snow had stopped and the world was going that hard blue that comes before a winter sunrise. Then he closed his eyes, and 2 tears ran sideways off his face into Edna's quilt, and he said, so quiet I had to lean down to catch it. They did not even give me that. My own people, they turned their backs, and I had done nothing. I didn't believe him, not yet. Why would I? I'd been told different by everyone I trusted. But I'd learn. Lord, I'd learn. And by the time I understood what nothing really meant, what he'd actually done, and why it had cost him everything, I'd be standing in the middle of redemption's only street watching that same broken man do the bravest thing I ever saw a human being do, while the whole town stood with their mouths open and not one word in them. But that's getting ahead. First you have to understand the lie, and to understand the lie you have to understand the boy. He stayed 11 days. I marked each one in my ledger with a single-line habit, like I told you, and on the 3rd day, when his fever broke for good and he could sit up against the wall and hold a cup, the story started coming out of him in pieces, the way a splinter works its way out of a hand. Not because I asked. I'd stopped asking. It came because a man who has been silent that long, who has had no one believe a single word from his mouth in months, will eventually spill everything to a stranger for the simple animal relief of being heard. His name was Tsela. The town had that right and almost nothing else. He'd been a young man with a wife and a small son, living on the reservation under the agent. And here I have to tell you about the agent, because the whole rotten thing turned on him. Agent Prout, a heavy soft man with a Bible on his desk and a ledger of his own, except his ledger lied. The government sent flour, beef, blankets, money, meant for the people penned up under his care. Prout sent most of it out the back door to merchants who paid him for it, and wrote it all down as delivered. People starved on paper full of food. Tsela had figured it out. Not because he was clever about white men's numbers, he said this plainly, no pride in it, but because his son got sick the winter the beef didn't come, and a sick child makes a father count things very carefully. He went to the agent. He was a respected man among his band, the kind people listened to, and he stood in Prout's office and said what he knew. That was his crime. That was the whole of it. He embarrassed a thief who had the law on his side. You can guess the rest, or most of it. Prout couldn't have a man like that talking, so a story got made. Stores went missing from the agency, Prout's own doing more than likely, or his men's, and Tsela's name got attached to the theft. Then a soldier turned up knifed, a soldier who, Tsela swore to me, he'd never laid eyes on, and the 2 crimes got braided together into one dangerous renegade, and a price got put on him, and the hunt was on. I could have run that night, he told me. We were shelling beans, the 2 of us, because by then he couldn't abide being useless and his hands needed work. Taken my wife, my son, gone south into Mexico, into the mountains. Many did. Why didn't you? He was quiet a while then, because if I ran, the story was true. A man who runs is a man who is guilty, and I had a son. He looked up at me. I wanted him to grow knowing his father stayed, that his father stood in front of the lie and said, no, this is not so, even when it cost him. I thought my own people would stand with me. I had done nothing. I had only told the truth about the food. Here is the part that I have turned over in my mind every day since, the part that I think is the cruelest thing I have ever learned about how the world works. His people did believe him, privately, but Prout sent word through the men who served him that the whole band would suffer for sheltering a wanted man, that the rations, what little came, would stop, that the soldiers would come, that the children already hungry would go hungrier. And so the elders made a choice. The kind of choice no one should have to make. They cast him out, publicly, turned their backs in the formal way so that the agent's men would see it and report it so that the band would be spared. They sacrificed one man to save the rest. They wept when they did it, he said. The old men, I saw it. That is how I knew they did not believe the lie. They wept and they turned away and they let me go alone because the price of keeping me was the children. And what kind of man, he said, and his voice did a thing here that I won't forget. What kind of man asks children to starve so that he may keep his honor? I could not, so I went. I told them it was right. I made it easy for them. That was the last gift I had to give my own people, to let them throw me away without it breaking them. I had to get up and go out to the barn after that. I told him I had to check the stock. The stock was fine. I stood in the dark with the cattle and I cried like I hadn't since we put Edna in the ground, because I had spent 3 winters thinking I knew exactly what kind of creature a man like Sella was, and I had been wrong in a way that there is no fixing, only living with. When I came back in, he didn't say anything about my face. That was a kindness. He'd had his whole life to learn how to let a man keep his dignity, since the world had spent so long stripping him of his own. The wound in his side was the gunshot that came near the end of the running. The soldiers had nearly had him at the wash. He'd been hit and he'd gone to ground, and when he couldn't run anymore and the storm came down, he'd done the only thing left. Folded himself into the hollow tree, the way an animal goes to den, to die out of the wind. I had decided to die, he told me, simple as weather. I was ready, I had made my peace, and then a fat old white man stuck his head in my tree and would not let me. A ghost of something crossed his face the first time I saw it that I realized after a second was humor. I thought, this is my punishment, not death. This man talking all the way home. I laughed. God, it felt strange to laugh. I do talk, I admitted. You never stop, he said. Even now shell the beans. That was the day I decided I wasn't going to turn him in. I think I decided it long before and was just waiting for an excuse to admit it to myself. But understand what that decision was. There was a price on his head. There was a marshal in redemption and a column of cavalry that came through twice a month, and harboring a wanted man, a wanted Apache in that year in that territory was not the kind of thing you did and kept your house, your standing, maybe your neck. Edna's people were buried in that town cemetery. I'd lived there my whole life. Every soul I knew on earth was within a day's ride, and every one of them would have called me a traitor and worse. I lay awake on it. The morally heavy thing isn't pulling a dying man out of a tree. Anybody decent does that in the moment, on instinct, before the cost is real. The heavy thing is the next morning, and the next, when the cost is real and you keep choosing him anyway, with your eyes open, knowing what it'll do to your life. I chose him. I'd like to say it was easy. It was not. There was a whole night I sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across my knees, not for him, for me, I think, for whatever I was about to become, and I argued both sides out loud until the sun came up and the argument was just over. The way arguments are when you finally admit you knew the answer all along. But it wasn't only my choice to make, and that's what I keep coming back to. Because around the 9th day, when Sella could walk the length of the room without the wall, he told me what he meant to do, and it turned my blood. He meant to go back. Not south, not into Mexico, not into the mountains. Not into the long, safe anonymity of a man who lets the world believe he's dead. He meant to walk into redemption, to the marshal, to everyone. You'll hang, I said. You walk in there, they'll have you dancing on a rope before noon. There won't even be a trial. Do you understand me? They've already decided what you are. Yes, he said. Then why? Because of the food. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Prout still has the agency. The flour still goes out the back door. The children I left, they are still hungry this winter because of him. My exile bought their safety for a season. It did not stop the thief. Nothing stops the thief. He is protected. He looked at me with those flat, steady eyes, except they weren't flat anymore. They were lit from somewhere far back. "I have papers." That stopped me. "What papers?" It came out slow, and it was the thing he'd been protecting all along, the thing he'd carried folded in oilcloth against his chest through the cold and the gunshot and the hollow tree, the thing he would have died in that tree rather than let the soldiers take off his body. Before he'd been driven out, he'd done one more careful thing. He'd gotten into the agency office one night and copied Prute's real ledger, the backdoor one, the lying one, page after page, the true numbers next to the false, in his own slow hand. He couldn't read white men's words well, but he could copy a thing exact, and numbers don't need translating. The proof, all of it, what came in, where it really went, who paid. "This is why they hunt me so hard," he said quietly. "Not the soldier, not the stores. Prute does not fear a renegade. The territory is full of renegades. He fears the man who can read his ledger back to him in front of the army. That is the crime they will hang me for if they understand it. And they will not understand it because I am only an Indian and no one will listen to an Indian." He folded the oilcloth packet back against his chest. "Unless I make them listen. Once. Loud enough. They'll kill you before you get a word out. Maybe," he almost smiled again, "but you will be there, a white man, a rancher, a man they know, and you will have read it first so that you can say, 'Yes, I have seen it, it is true,' when I cannot speak anymore." He let that sit. "That is what I am asking you, not to hide me, to stand next to me one time in your town and not turn your back, the thing my own people could not do. I do not blame them, but I am asking you." And there it was, the whole weight of it set down in my kitchen on Edna's quilt in the warm. I could keep him hidden and safe and useless, and the children would stay hungry and the thief would stay fat. Or I could help a man I'd known 11 days walk into my own town and almost certainly die, and lose, in that same hour, everything I'd built and every neighbor I had, on the chance that a hungry agent might finally be made to answer for it. I didn't sleep that night either, but I want to tell you something. Somewhere in the dark I stopped doing the arithmetic. I've been adding up the cost of everything for so long, the survival math, his and mine both, and I just laid the pencil down. Some things you don't get to count your way out of. You just have to decide who you are and then go be him and let the numbers fall where they fall. In the morning I told him I'd come. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that the marshal already had a rider out our way, because someone had seen smoke from a chimney that should have been an old widower's small, lonely fire, and was instead burning a little too long, a little too steady, like there were 2 people in that house keeping warm. They were coming to us. We were just 1 day from saving them the trip. We rode in on the coldest morning of that whole bitter year. I gave him my dead son's coat. It was the only thing I had that would fit him, and I won't pretend my hand didn't shake taking it out of the trunk, but I figured if it was going to mean something again, it might as well mean this. He put it on. He stood up straight in it, the gunshot still pulling at his side, the crooked foot, the papers in their oilcloth tied flat against his chest under his shirt, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said the thing we were both thinking, which was that one or both of us might not ride home. Redemption on a winter morning is a sorry-looking place. 1 street, false front buildings leaning into the wind, the marshal's office and the saloon and the church taking up most of what mattered. I'd ridden into that town 10,000 times. I had never once ridden into it afraid of it. That morning I was. They saw us coming a long way off. By the time we reached the head of the street, there were men out on the boardwalks, and the word had already run ahead of us the way it does, because somebody recognized me, and somebody recognized him, and a sound went up and down the street that I can only call a kind of low growl, the sound a town makes when it scents something it's already decided to kill. The marshal came out into the road. Tate, his name was. Not a bad man, as those things go better than most. He had his hand on his gun and his eyes on Sella, and the question on his face was, "What in God's name are you doing, Asa?" Because he knew me, because I was one of his own. "Step away from him, Asa," he said. "Right now, we've been looking for that one all winter." And here is the part. Here is the part I've never told straight to anyone, the part that page in my ledger should have held and didn't. I'd had a speech ready. I'd practiced it the whole ride. I was going to explain, going to lay it out reasonable and slow the way you do with frightened men, going to make them see. But I got one look at that street, at every face I'd known my whole life arranged into one wall of hate, at Tate's hand on his gun, at the rope I swear I could already feel hanging in the air, and the speech went right out of my head, and I understood with a cold clarity that words from me weren't going to do it. They'd shoot him for moving wrong before I got to my third sentence. They didn't need a reason. They had 3 years of reasons, every one of them a lie, and the lies were comfortable, and the truth was an Apache standing in a dead boy's coat. So I didn't make my speech. Sella did the thing instead. He got down off the horse slow, both hands open and out from his body, that same empty hand sign. The most dangerous thing a hunted man can do is move, and he moved anyway into the middle of the street, into the open, where every gun in town could see he held nothing. And he stood there. And in the silence, because the growl had stopped, a crowd will always go quiet for a man walking willingly toward his own death. It confuses them. He reached into his shirt. 40 guns came up. I heard them, that sound. I have heard it in nightmares since. And Sella, with 40 barrels on him, pulled out not a weapon but the oilcloth packet, and he held it up over his head where they could all see it was paper, only paper, and he turned in a slow circle so that the whole street could see, and then he spoke. His voice was still wrecked from the cold, and it didn't carry the way he needed it to, and I saw the awful thing happen. I saw it cost him to make the sound, saw the gunshot wound take the breath right out from under his words, and his voice failed in the middle of the most important sentence of his life. That's when I found out what I was for. I got off my horse and I walked out into that street next to him, and I will tell you, every step felt like walking into deep water, my own neighbors' faces going white and ugly with the sight of a white man taking an Apache's side. And I stood at his shoulder, where the band of elders should have stood and could not. And I said it loud, loud enough to carry, in the plain, flat voice of a man they'd all known 40 years and never caught in a lie. His name is Sella. He's no thief. He's no killer. The thief is Agent Prout, and this paper is Prout's own ledger. Cop it out true. The food he stole off starving children and sold for his own pocket, and I have read it, and so help me God it is so. And if you hang this man, you hang the only proof there is, and you'll be doing the thief's killing for him. And then, because I'd learned it from him, I think, in 11 days I'd learned it, I opened my own hands, empty, standing next to him, the two of us in the middle of the street with our hands open in the cold. Now I want to tell you the town fell to its knees and wept and saw the light. It didn't. That's not how people are. What happened was worse and stranger and more human than that. Nothing happened. For a long, long moment, nothing happened at all. The whole street stood frozen, guns still up, breath smoking in the cold. Every face caught between the lie they'd lived in for 3 years and the thing they'd just been handed. You could see them not wanting it. You could see them hating the truth, because the truth meant they'd been wrong, meant they'd hunted an innocent man, meant the comfortable hate had been a lie they'd all agreed to. People will do almost anything before they'll forgive you for being right when it makes them wrong. And into that silence, into that frozen street, came the only sound that could have broken it. A woman crying. Old Mrs. Hadley, the storekeeper's wife, who I would never in 100 years have guessed. She'd come out onto the boardwalk and she had her hand over her mouth and she was crying. And through it she said the thing that nobody else had the nerve to say. She said, "We knew. Some of us knew Prout was, we knew the food wasn't right, we knew, and we said nothing." And that was the crack in the dam. Not Sella's paper. Not my speech. One old woman admitting out loud what a lot of them had buried, that they'd had their own suspicions about that fat, soft man and his Bible and his ledger, and had looked away because looking away was easier and safer, and the man it would have cost was only an Indian. The marshal lowered his gun, slow, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He came and took the papers from Tsella's hand, and he read them right there in the street, his lips moving, his face going from the bottom of his soul, and when he looked up he didn't look at Tsella. He couldn't. He looked at me, and what was in his face was the worst thing I ever saw on a man, not anger. Shame. The pure shame of a decent man who's just understood what he was about to do, and what he'd already done, and that there was no taking any of it back. Nobody hanged anybody that day. They arrested Prout within the month, once the army's own people got hold of those numbers and matched them against what they'd shipped. He didn't hang either, men like Prout rarely do. He had friends and lawyers and the long, slow machinery of his kind, but he was finished, broke and disgraced and run off, and the food, I'm told, started reaching the people it was meant for, at least for a while, at least better than before. The children Tsella had been driven out to protect. Some of them lived who might not have. You don't get to know which ones. You just have to trust the arithmetic you laid the pencil down on. The town never talked about it. That's the part folks find strange when I tell it. You'd think a thing like that would be told and retold, but it was the opposite. Redemption shut its mouth on the whole affair and never opened it again, because there was no version of the story where the town came out clean, and people would rather forget a thing entire than remember themselves wrong inside it. The marshal moved on within the year. Mrs. Hadley never quite met my eye after. The silence wasn't peace. It was a wound healed crooked, like Tsella's foot. As for him, he didn't stay. I asked him to. I'd grown to need that scarred, quiet man at my table more than I'd admit, an old widower's loneliness being its own kind of hollow tree, but he wouldn't, and I understood why, and I didn't push. He went back to find what was left of his people, to tell them he was alive, that the lie was broken, that they could stop weeping over the man they'd thrown away. He never said whether he found them. He wrote me once, a year on, a few lines somebody must have helped him put into English, and all it really said was that his son was well and growing, and that the boy now knew the whole of it, knew that his father had stayed and stood in front of the lie, and said no, this is not so, even when it cost him everything. Which was, you'll remember, the only thing the man ever wanted. I rode out to the cottonwood last week. I'm old now, older than I ever expected to get, and I don't ride much, but I wanted to see it once more before the winter or my heart, whichever comes first. It's still standing, dead and split, that seam down its south side just wide enough for a small folded man. I sat my horse in front of it a long while. I used to think it was a strange and terrible thing, that a hollow tree, a dead thing, a rotted-out shell, the kind of thing a man rides past without looking, should be what saved his life. That the world had nothing better to offer him at the worst hour of his worst year than a corpse of a tree to die in slower. I don't think that anymore. I've come around to thinking the tree wasn't the strange part. Hollow things shelter what's left in them all the time. That's just what's hollow is for, if you're lucky. The strange part was the old man who heard the breathing and got down off his horse. I never did write that page back into my ledger. Some things you keep out of the book and carry in your chest instead, folded in oilcloth against the cold.